As time passes, us as humans have realized bigger isn't always better. Over time, we've been trying to make everything we possibly can smaller, like phones, cars, computers, stuff like that. But as the man of science that I am, today I've decided to shrink myself down to be the best tie-the-one-up guy I could possibly be. Right here, I've built a scaled-down replica of the room that I film in, so don't worry, everything will feel just like normal. Everything's in place and all ready to go. All I gotta do is hit this button right up here, right next to the red light. Once I hit that, I will shrink down to teeny tiny little tie-the-one-up guy. Once that's done and I think it's time to grow, I hit this button here on the bottom. Without further ado, let's get started. Guys, I think it's working. I can feel myself shrinking by the second. Oh man, I can't believe it worked. I can't wait to see the world from a tiny perspective. I can't believe it worked! Well, now that I'm this small, I wanted to use this as an excuse to talk about the NES Classic, or as some people call it, the NES Mini. But, to be honest, from here, it doesn't look so mini. The Nintendo Entertainment System, Nintendo's first jump into the console market. This console and its game library saved the video game industry back in the 1980s, and to this day people still have fond memories of this thing. And let me tell you a story about my memories with this bad boy back in the day. I didn't exist yet. So with such a great classic game library and fond memories, it was a no-brainer that these games would be playable in other places. Whether it be Nintendo Switch Online or Virtual Console, these games are widely accessible. Well, the best of them are. There's a lot of garbage on the NES. But in 2016, nostalgia in the gaming industry was being shoved down our throats like it is today in every way possible. And that's why we have the NES Classic. I remember seeing the ads for this thing, and all the ads relied strongly on 80s Nintendo nostalgia, because why wouldn't it be? It's the Nintendo Entertainment System. It even had the classic, "Now you're playing with power." And people were going crazy. And I can show you my exact reaction to when I saw this. Huh. That's cool. Okay, again, think about it. I wasn't around for this era, so I'm not going to get super nostalgic for these games. Yes, I know they started multiple series that I love, and yes, I enjoy some of these NES games, but I'm not going to get super hyped to play Mario 2 again. Now, I know what you're thinking. Oh, well, if this isn't for you, then don't buy it. Well, if you're thinking that, then you don't know me at all. Of course I bought this. Why wouldn't I? It's a good way to play classic games, but I had an issue trying to buy this thing. This thing sold out immediately. It was an affordable way to play many classic NES games from people's childhoods. I knew it was going to go fast. I remember being in line when this came out. It was a weird experience too, because I was in line with my high school geography teacher at the time. He was one spot ahead of me and he was telling me how excited he was for it, and he ended up getting the last one, which meant I lost my chance. And the next day in class, it was quite awkward. But for the next couple of months, this thing sold out everywhere. At the time, it was harder to find the PS5. Okay, no, that might be a little excessive. But it was near impossible to find one for a good while. But eventually, I found one at a GameStop in the middle of nowhere and picked it up, thankfully. Because I got extremely lucky, because not long after I found mine, Nintendo discontinued the product. And nobody could understand why. The system itself was selling insanely well, and it showed no signs of stopping. Well, until Nintendo discontinued it, and at the time, people weren't happy. Nintendo has a problem preserving their classic games that drives people insane. But in 2018, Nintendo manufactured a decent amount more before discontinuing it again. The NES Classic is a modern version of the Nintendo Entertainment System, just shrunk down a ton to fit in my hand. The thing itself comes with 30 games ready to go from the minute you boot this up, which is more than my plug-and-play Atari. But my plug-and-play Atari comes with Yar's Revenge, so why even bother hooking up my NES? But anyway, the selection on here is pretty good. You kind of have everything you'd expect to be here, like your classic Marios and Zeldas, throw in a Mega Man 2 if you're feeling fancy, but the library is good. It shows off most of the greats the NES had, which sometimes I think is often overlooked due to the massive amounts of garbage licensed games the NES had. But overall, the game library is probably one of the most important parts here, because, well, it's a collection of classic games. What else would you be looking for? Next we have the controller and the console design. This is just one of my favorite things about the NES Classic. The design itself is really well done. It's just the NES, but just so itty-bitty. It seriously just feels like they shrunk the NES to make it fit the classic size itself. It holds on to its iconic look and feel. Speaking of which, I'm happy to say the controller does the same. These things are pretty much identical here. You couldn't tell the difference just by looking at the face of each controller which one is which. Also, the console itself is very simple to plug in. Just like modern gaming consoles, all you need to plug it in is an HDMI and a wall outlet and you're good to go. But the NES console took the authenticity to a level lower than I think it should have. The controller wire is insanely short. You really gotta sit right next to the TV to play this thing due to the length of the controller wire. And I know, I get it, that's how it used to be, but come on. Offer us some wireless NES controllers if we really want. I had to buy an extender for this thing, and it doesn't work all that well. It's not on brand. Now, as for the NES Classic, there's not too much left to be said about the hardware itself. The console knows what it needs to do and excels at bringing back that feel of playing classic games on your old TV. Wait, again, I don't relate to that, I didn't exist. But I can imagine it felt just like it did back in the 80s. But we're not done here. Not quite yet. Even if it seemed like Nintendo absolutely hated the NES Classic by discontinuing it so early, in 2017 they released the SNES Classic. Now the SNES Classic was the same deal as the NES Classic. It had a good game library, the console design itself was the same thing, just smaller, the controllers were near identical to the last ones, but the SNES Classic was just a little less rare than the NES Classic. But it didn't matter because a year after the NES Classic was released, it got discontinued. At first, I didn't get this. I thought from a business standpoint, this was absolutely stupid. Because why would you discontinue these? They're selling so well. But then I realized something. This was around the time the Nintendo Switch was released. The Switch was the first Nintendo console to have paid online. What comes with paid online? Honestly, at the time, due to Nintendo never doing this beforehand, they needed to pull to their online subscription service. And while their subscription service was relatively cheap, there still needed to be a pull because for the first 2 years of the Switch's lifespan, online was free. So it was going to be hard to convince people to buy it, so they threw in a ton of classic NES and SNES games and constantly added more. And I guess they thought having the NES Classic and the SNES Classic around would maybe deter people from paying $20 a year instead of picking up a classic console for a one-time payment of $60. And I guess, yeah, it kinda makes sense. Nintendo Switch Online really needed anything it could to convince people that it was worth it and have a better alternative to play those classic games lying around maybe could deter some people. But with the way the NES Classic and NES Classic were selling, I don't think they should have discontinued those, because they were showing no signs of slowing down. But overall, the NES Classic's a fun little collectible that I'm glad I got my hands on. Every time I boot it up, it's a joy to play one of the games on here. But honestly, it sucks that this got discontinued as early as it did. This should not have been as hard to find as it was, but unfortunately at this point, what are you gonna do? Well, I think I've just about had enough of being tiny tie the one up guy. So now it's time to grow back to normal size. I must have dropped the controller when I shrunk. If I don't find it, I'm gonna be stuck at this size forever. Ethan, put me down.
Whoa, why are you so small?
I shrunk myself and I couldn't grow back. I need you to hit the third button on that controller there.
Oh, cool! Look at how small I am!
Idiot, you hit the first button. You were supposed to hit the third button.
I hit the one you told me to, the third one!
It's fine. I can grow us from here now that we have the controller. Whoa! Hey, it worked! I'm not small anymore! Now to avoid that from happening again, I'm gonna go destroy this.
Tyler, can you grow me?
You know, I'm okay with this.